we like to buy from people and not businesses. And I think journalists do a better job of bringing the humanity out in these articles and things like that, a better job than we do. And I think that's where the real magic happens.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's show. Excited to talk with Mickie Kennedy from eReleases. He's here really to talk to us about how to use PR to boost our credibility. So first off, welcome to the show, Mickie. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, and kind of how you got to where you are?
Sure. So my name is Mickie Kennedy. I run eReleases. We've been around for 27 years this year. So we've been around a while.
Congratulations.
And I started with PR about 30 years ago. I had finished a MFA creative writing degree, and my emphasis was poetry. And I'm like, I was just going to wait tables and write poetry. And so I had always done that part-time waiting tables. And then I did it full-time the summer after I graduated and realized full-time waiting tables is like 50 to 60 hours, mostly on concrete, standing. Back hurts, I just feel exhausted, and I never wanted to roll another silverware again. So I
think we probably all did on this.
So I transitioned to an office job, and I got hired at a telecom research startup as employee number 3. And because I had writing in my background, among the 30,000 things they wanted me to do was to write press releases and fax them out. And so we had a Rolodex of 150 fax numbers to send to, and our fax machine, state of the art that it was, held only 100 numbers. So I would waste 2 days each time we sent out press releases, programming 100 numbers, hitting send, then having to delete those to put 50 more in. And you'd literally wait a whole day for it to try to finish sending. And the next morning you collect all the errors and add those to the next batch that you're sending and trying to finish it that day. And what I found was at the end of that, nothing happened. And I mentioned to the owner, I was like, hey, we sent that release out and nothing happened. He goes, yeah, it never does. He goes, it just, we're expected to write press releases and send them out, but yeah, they never do anything with them. And I'm like, we're wasting 2 days here. I'm wasting 2 days here.
Right.
I kind of want to spend a little time figuring out, what we're doing wrong, if we're doing anything wrong. And what I found out was we were publishing data, and a lot of people say data is great for the media, but we weren't really putting it in context. Like, we just sent out, hey, here's our latest Caribbean country, U.S. Telecom traffic, traffic to everyone. And here's the number of minutes, for this past year, and nothing happened. And I was like, well, let's look for the story here. And I had noticed that most journalists, even if it's a small article, like to write in a story arc. And I was like, how do you write numbers in a story arc where there's only numbers? But I did notice that, like, one of these countries, I can't even remember what it was, but it wasn't one you've heard. It was like not a normal Caribbean country you've heard of, but it had more telecom traffic than all the others by far. And I asked them, what's the story here? And they go, 1-900 numbers, which nobody listening probably does, but they were popular 30 years ago. They all routed through this country. I think like the 900 is like to them. And it just rerouted through this country, and they're taking advantage of this. And if for those who don't know, there was all these 1-900 numbers, and each one had a different price. So you could call one and get like your horoscope pre-recorded, and you press 7 if you're a Leo and 6 if you're a Virgo or something. And you'd hear, people talk real slowly, try and get that third or fourth minute in at 50, 75 cents a minute to get your horoscope. But you could also talk to people live. They had like pet experts, there was psychics, there was everything from like, reading children's stories to more mature stuff during the time. And so I was like, oh, this is cool. So I wrote a press release about 1-900 numbers and how they're tied to this country, and, also put our data in there and fax that out. And another 2 days gone. But this time we got picked up by the Financial Times, The Economist, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Red Herring, and 3 or 4 telecom trade publications. And it was different. And I was just like, whoa. I was like, I wonder if we could keep doing this. And we never got that many again, but we routinely got 2 or 3 pickups on average every time we were doing more story-based stuff. And I just felt like, this is cool, but I wouldn't want to do this for a living because faxing sucks. And then around the same time, I would do more batches of faxing and I'd get phone calls saying, hey, could you start emailing your press releases to us instead of faxing? And I remember celebrating the day that I was able to take the 51st person off so that I didn't have to reprogram the fax machine. I could keep the numbers in the fax machine and just store it and then pull it out and hit send. And it saved so much time. But it gave me the idea for emailing press releases as a business. And that's how eReleases started. And over the years, that business model does not work well anymore. But fortunately, I had transitioned years before because PR Newswire kept reaching out to us and saying, hey, we like what you're doing. Have you thought about offering us as an add-on? And I'm like, oh, how much do you charge? And just to give you a comparison, today, for like a 600-word press release to go out nationally, PR Newswire charges over $1,700. And my clients at the time were paying a couple hundred. And today it's still a few $100s. And I was just like, I don't think they can afford it. And I said, but could you give me really great pricing if all of my clients went through you? And they were like, oh, well, what kind of volume are you talking about? And so I think at the time it was like 3,000 or 4,000 releases a year. Today we do over 10,000 releases a year. And so we have a really good rate, and we have some caveats, but you can use us for probably about a quarter to a third of what you would pay if you went directly to the wire for a national distribution of a press release. Still goes to all the trade publications and all of that, but it also goes nationally to all the media. And so it's a really good value from that standpoint. And I'd mentioned my original business model of emailing. Over the past 20 years, media databases have become pretty commonplace, paying anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000 a year for a license, and you get to send to journalists. And what happens is you have a golf club company buys it, they hit send of their press release to 2,200 golf journalists, and nothing happens. And rather than go back and try to figure out what they did wrong, like I did originally, they just said, we just need to send it to more people. And so they go, who loves to play golf? Bankers and Wall Street types. So let's send this to financial analysts and people who report on publicly traded companies and stocks, knowing they'll never write on golf clubs. Or maybe they do think that they will write on golf clubs, but they never have, and they never will. But that happens now in every industry. And national journalists' biggest complaint is their inbox is chaos. And they usually just create filters for people that they recognize and are safe and send them to a different folder. And in the inbox, they just sort of skim it and move on because it's just so bad. But the Newswire is exactly the opposite. In the US, there's basically a duopoly. There's Business Wire and PR Newswire for press releases. And there's other wires you've heard of, AP, Reuters, places like, they do not transmit press releases. They originally write the articles that run on their network because they get licensed by newspapers and other media outlets to say, hey, we're the Baltimore Sun and the editor wants to go home rather than stay up and write an article about a Supreme Court decision that just happened. They'll just pull it off the AP and pay a licensing fee, or they already have an arrangement. And that's how that works. But for businesses that are transmitting press releases, it's basically PR Newswire and Business Wire. And they're very clean, and the industry feeds are very, there are editors who look and make sure that you're choosing appropriate. You're not a golf club company saying, let's go to banking, let's go to business marketing and other things like that. So journalists love it because they can log in, look at their feed, and they can even customize their feed. So like maybe they cover fashion, but they cover like retail, not the high fashion. So they can set up keywords to exclude. If it's mentioning Gucci or Hermes or Hermes or whatever it is, I don't want to see it. So it's a very clean and relevant to them. And that's the real value of it, because what's also happened over the past 20 years is classified ads have gone away. Journalists are expected to do double today what they were doing in the past. Very little time for investigative journalism. Instead of writing 2 to 3 articles a week, it's 4 to 8 articles a week. And so they're expected to do more with less. And so they're relying more on, just knowing where to fish. And the two biggest ponds, of course, in the US are PR Newswire and Business Wire.
Cool. So I guess when I think of news releases or press releases, what I think of is either sports, right? So like I'm an athlete that just got signed, or I'm an athlete that had a transaction, or I think back to my like SEC days when like, anytime someone was hired or we'd have a quarter release, we'd have to do the press releases. And so thinking about your business model. So if I'm own a $5 million company and I'm sitting here listening to this podcast, I'm like, okay, awesome. I understand what you just talked about, but how can I use this to benefit my business, and what type of press releases can I have that might help draw me customers, or if people to really understand who I am?
Sure. So what is appropriate to send out is any major milestone. So you've hired a new executive, like someone who's really recognized in the industry, or you have a new CEO or something like that. That's an event that certainly a press release would be appropriate, and to let your industry know about. Yeah, Helen, the new associate in HR, maybe you don't do a press release for Helen. She's not, she's not important enough. So you want to make sure that, it's an announcement that's newsworthy enough. But that being said, a lot of things that people issue could be made a little more newsworthy. For example, product launch and service launches are, the most common type of press release that we get. And it's usually, missing the elements to create a story. It's usually, here's a new product or service, here's a list of features, and here's a page to learn more or buy it. And from a journalist standpoint, you remember they're writing not for you, but for their audience. They have to either educate or entertain, or ideally both, their audience. And is that announcement going to do it? No. But one of the easiest things you can do is incorporate a use case study. Like, hey, here's a failing business, 3 years old, been losing 12% this most recent year. You could take a publicly available data point and say, in our industry, 63% of new companies fail in the first 5 years because they don't achieve profitability. And, by using our solution 90 days in, they're projected to have a 5% net profit at the end of this year for the first time. Then you follow that up with a quote by the client saying, of all the things that I thought we needed to do, I thought it was just win more contracts. But what I found is you could win unlimited contracts. If you're losing money on every one, you'll never be profitable. Or something that just speaks to what they're going through. That has a little bit of suspense and play, and you can build the story arc, and that gives it a much more likelihood that journalists can take that and get a compelling article that they can share with the audience. You can kill, what do they call it? Kill two birds with one stone. You want to satisfy the journalist's need to have something that's going to really delight their audience. But at the same time, you want to promote what you're doing. And you can accomplish both. But so many people are only thinking about themselves, that they're only trying to kill one bird, and it doesn't really satisfy the journalist. And therefore, you just get ignored.
Is that the difference between what an ad campaign and then, a PR? So that you're attacking one area versus attacking a lot?
Yeah. When someone is doing an ad, it's just like, it's very guilty. It's like, we just want to sell this. And so we want to present it in a way that we feel is going to be compelling from an advertising standpoint. That being said, people have blinders on when it comes to ads. We are suspicious. We're not inquisitive. We don't get curious often when we see ads. We just sort of move on. When we read an article, it's almost like a third-party endorsement when a journalist writes about you. It's like, they feel more invested. And there's usually this, when you read something, you get this human interest element. And, it's often because of that story. And I've seen a lot of Kickstarter campaigns where they talk about this person who just wanted this one product to have a change so that it could be used in this really interesting and valuable way that could apply to a lot of people, and the company's not interested in changing it. So this person's like, all of a sudden I'm talking to companies in China trying to get these molds made because I'm going to make it. And you're like, all of a sudden you're like, I don't need this gadget, but I'll give this guy $30 to help them towards their dream and stuff like that. And that's what happens because you start rooting for the person. And we like to buy from people and not businesses. And I think journalists do a better job of bringing the humanity out in these articles and things like that, a better job than we do when we're writing ads and things like that. And I think that's where the real magic happens. I've had people come to me and say, we had this article and there was a link in it to us, and it looks like 30% of the people who visit from that link bought. And, our best landing page is converting at like 3%. Is that possible? And I'm like, sure, because not everybody who read it clicked through to it. But the people that did, they got that, sort of that trust factor and that trust signal, and they just want to go and work with you. And especially they were a consumer product, lower end, very affordable, not that type of decision you have to go and consult or plan for. It's just like click and support or click and buy. And so, yeah, those are the kinds of things that happen there. People generally, when they read an article and buy from you, they're not price shopping. They want to support the person they read about. And so they're not as price sensitive at that moment. And they tend to be more loyal. They're like, oh yeah, I remember that company. They were on Shark Tank. And when they opened, they didn't, share their numbers. No one does. They share their numbers after they told you the story. Sometimes it's like, a vulnerability, they lost their job. And, they said, this has happened again and again. I want to be in control. I want to start my own destiny. Or, in another case, I had this hobby that I used to do with my dad, and he died. And I thought, now's the time to turn that into a business because I don't have children and I can commit to it and I want to see this succeed. And what that does is it just, that human interest element it smacks and gets us involved, and we root for them. Even if they don't get funding, there is this huge upsurge of people who place orders and support these people because they shared their story and they got vulnerable, and we want to support the people behind these businesses.
So I'm curious. So how do you define success to your clients? So I hear a couple of things you mentioned there. So one, is it like pickups? So how many news articles or news stories the press release gets picked up in, or is it conversion rate? And then the second part to that question is how successful are you? Like how often does that happen? Like what can a client expect?
That's right. So I'll start out with the bad news first. 97% of press releases that get issued over the wire, and they pay a lot of money. I said it was $1,700 to go over the wire. 97% of them generate no earned media. Yep. So it's not easy. But that being said, I define success as earned media. And for some people, it's, life transforming. I had one client who called and said, I don't know what a press release is, but my boss says we have to do one. And at the end of it, they sent out a press release, and it was a waste management company that builds waste management facilities, everything, including recycling, for mostly municipalities, cities. They'll come in and they just do everything. And they sent out a press release, and they got picked up in Waste News, which was I think it's a monthly magazine, trade magazine. And a company a city in Australia reached out and said, hey, can you build these in Australia? And they go, yeah, we do them in South America. We do them in India. We're all over. We put them on barges or boats and ship them out. And we are there and we put them all up. And in Australia, they said, yeah, we've been talking to like 30 different vendors to how each to do a separate piece. And you come in and you do everything from the ground up and hire people to assemble it and put it all together. That's what we want and need. At the end of it, it resulted in 3 municipalities getting facilities in Australia. And then he said it was over $30 or $40 million at the time. And just from, a $300 press release. And that person's job was an office assistant, he didn't know how to do a press release. We walked him through it. And I think it was under $400 to send it out. And he said that the owner is always coming by, just patting him on the shoulder saying, good job. But, it varies for people. I mean, I've had people, we have a case study on our website for an effort that was very short-lived during the pandemic called the Dining Bond Initiative. It was sort of like a volunteer grassroots kind of thing built up the War Bond Initiative. And basically, they were wanting to help restaurants that were closed during the pandemic. And it was very early in it. We were still just sent home for 2 weeks to flatten the curve at that time. And we sent out a release. I quit counting after 100 media pickups because the amount of daily papers that picked it up just seemed limitless. It got picked up by all the big publications as well as these dailies, generated over $10 million in revenue for restaurants. And the way it worked is you would nominate your favorite local restaurant. And if the volunteers were able to get a hold of them, you would give money that went directly to them immediately. And it'd be backed by a dining bond or gift certificate type scenario. And it's like, if you had a favorite restaurant you went to on your anniversary, you just wanted to give them $50 or $100 to let you know I'm thinking of you, and I hope that it helps a little bit. It was just something that people really responded to, and I think it was because there was such negative news and uncertainty that here was something positive, so it did very well. And also I think it was actionable. We were sent home, we were powerless, but here was something we could do to help in our local community, and it just did very well. And so that shows that this can go really wide if you have something that's just really speaks to people. But that being said, the biggest thing that I did during the pandemic is I honed in on the 3% of press releases that do get picked up, and I created a free masterclass that is originally 11 hours long, but I've got it under an hour because I was told by my staff that, we live in a TikTok world. No one's going to watch 11 hours. So it goes through the types of releases that represent the 3% that almost anyone can do. And the first is story arc, telling something in a story format. What's your story? The same thing with the Shark Tank. What is, you can sometimes talk about, your reason for being in business. Sometimes you can talk about the impetus for a product or solution, but that's not always applicable. But even when you have just like a product launch, what is the case study that you could put in there, the story elements that you can give them? There's things like, a long time ago, someone coined newsjacking, and I think by the time they finished spelling it, it was already out of favor. It was basically, if something was trending, you do a press release on it. And I had someone say, hey, this Target credit card breach, this was years ago, I was thinking about doing a press release on it. And I said, well, let's go look on Business Wire and PR Newswire. And I said, oh, yeah, there's like 1,400 other people who've had the same idea. And I doubt that there's going to be that many stories. And so what I suggested is, if you're going to join a conversation like that, never join it with the same message as everybody else. Be a contrarian. Is there something in this announcement that you could be a contrarian about? Because if you think about it, in the case of the Target credit card breach, let's say there was 50 articles that got written about it in major publications. If you're the only person raising your hand and giving a contrarian viewpoint to what everybody else is saying, you have the likelihood you could be plugged into all 50 of those articles because no one else is doing the contrarian viewpoint. And journalists technically like to be fair and balanced. And so you do stand the likelihood of being plugged in there. I noticed that when I worked with the telecom research company, there was a guy there in the telecom world who had a website. And every time there was even the hint or smell of a telecom merger, he would just update his website and say, here's 2 or 3 quotes on this impending merger, if there even is one that announced. And they were always negative. So, and it's funny because, if MCI, they did, I think, merge with WorldCom, when they announced it, they both issued press releases saying, this is good for consumers. It's going to give you more leverage and synergy and lower prices. And, this guy's like, oh, this is going to be terrible. This is bad for consumers. And so he always was ready with these quotes. Every time there was an article in the telecom publications, Wall Street Journal, any of these places about these mergers, he was quoted in at least half of them because he was the contrarian on every merger in the telecom world. And that's a really great place to be if you're comfortable. You have to make sure that if you are being a contrarian, that you're not going to alienate yourself with your customers. I had one client come to me and say, Mickie, I'm getting all this great press, but my customers now say they hate me. And I'm like, well, maybe that's a sign that you shouldn't be taking these contrarian viewpoints on every issue. This person was really good at being like the devil's advocate of contrarian. But so you just have to be mindful of that. But there's other types of things that I go through that you can do. I have one type of press release that has never failed. The least it's ever generated in earned media is 4 articles, and average is like 7 to 12 articles. And that's to do an industry survey. And I know that people's eyes are going to glaze over, and that seems like such hard work. But I tell you, you do a Survey Monkey, 4 questions per page, 3 pages of 12 questions, or 4 pages, 16 questions, really brainstorm and ask thoughtful questions like what's going on in your industry. AI is hot. Is there questions around AI? If I'm in the graphic design business, I'd be like, do you believe that your job's going to be replaced by AI in 5 years? And you could ask things around that. But brainstorm. If you were going to a trade show or conference, what are some of the questions you'd ask? And often you're thinking of questions to ask at these trade shows and conferences because you're being ignored by the media. They don't mean to ignore it, but there's usually things that you see. And I say, I wonder if it's just our business experiencing this or others in our field that are experiencing this. Those are great questions to ask. But sometimes just, regular questions. Do you plan on spending more or less in the next quarter on marketing? Are you finding it, people's budgets are going up, or are they going down, or are they staying the same? You can really build out those into sort of like a your own prediction of where the industry's economy is going in the next 6 months to a year based on that. And then you're going to have a quote in there as why you felt the numbers skewed in a particular way. And of course, you're only focusing on a couple of the questions in the press release, but do build out a page on your website where you put all the questions and answers so journalists can go there and hunt for other stories that might be there. But you ideally, hopefully, decided to pick on the 2 biggest aha moments from the survey, and sometimes share with others to say what you think would be most shocking if this came out. And generally, when we do those press releases and send those out, it's a minimum of 4 articles, and it's often as many as a range between 7 and 14 that we see. And the next pushback I get from clients is I don't know enough people to send a survey to. And the thing is, every industry has dozens, if not hundreds, of independent and small trade associations. You want to steer clear of the big ones because they don't need you and they're not going to cooperate. But the smaller and independent ones are out there. I like the ones that have at least 700, 800 members or more. And, I had one person tell me, well, Mickie, in public relations, there's only PRSA. And I was like, well, there's 700 others in North America. And they were shocked. And so I told them that there was one that I like to use that has, it represents PR firms of 50 employees or less. And I was like, that's probably 80% of the PR firm market. And, I don't know that I even like one person surveying for the large companies, because how are you going to get someone to agree what the whole corporation really feels on a particular subject? Right. But, and that's a great association because nobody knows these associations exist. They thrive on getting a little publicity themselves. So I always approach it as like, hey, I have this link. Could you send it to your members? I'm looking for a minimum of 100 responses to be statistically relevant. And if we get that, I will mention you in the press release I'll be issuing nationally over PR Newswire in the coming weeks. 2/3 of the time, they'll say yes right off the bat because it's an opportunity for them to get some media attention. And all they have to do is generally email and maybe do a social media push. And because I mentioned I'm looking for 100 responses, if I don't get it, they often will help me do a second push so that we get our numbers up and we get closer to that.
Yeah, that's a lot to dig in on this topic. So I definitely think there's been you've really dug into it and really understand the industry. So I think hopefully anyone listening to this goes out and checks your website out and wants to, again, it's a lot more than I thought went into press releases based on my limited experience with it. So I appreciate that. But we're close to time here. So I want to ask the final fun question. And you did mention your poetry background, and I'm not going to embarrass me. Maybe Jody has a better understanding of poetry than I do. I'd be like, my favorite poet is Dr. Seuss, because that's about how deep my poetry goes. But I am curious, since obviously you're interested in writing and writers, for both of you, and this is a question I've asked before, but it's one of my favorites, is what's the last good book you guys have read? It could be any fiction, nonfiction, doesn't matter to me. I'm just kind of curious if there's any books I need to be investing in. So Jody, I'll start with you because I know you're reading like 10 books a week or something like that at this point. So.
Not that many. I can actually look it up. Yeah.
I pulled my
come back to me here because I got to look.
All right, Mickie, do you have a good one, Mickie?
I do. I recently pulled out a book, The Way It Is by William Stafford. He's an older poet, and someone had written a poem about a deer dead on the side of the road. And I'm like, why do people even bother after William Stafford's book, which has the most perfect poem about that in it? And I pulled it out and was sharing it with a friend, and I just got lost in the book again. It's like such an amazing writer. And, you know, there's a reason we go back to the classics and stuff like that. I know that a lot, especially in literature today, a lot of the older white men are getting beat up in there, but, you know, he's a really great writer, and just amazing, you know, diction and word choice and images and things like that. And it just reminded me that, you know, the classics are usually the classics for a reason.
Awesome. Yeah. What about you, Jody?
Yeah, I was trying to think, because a lot of the books I read are the business books, and so I was in a strategic coach meeting, and the lady's like, you know, hey, you should read 1 to 2, you know, basically fiction books. And I thought, well, I used to do that like a lot when I was younger, and all the way through college and everything. I thought, yeah, I'll do that, and I picked up a book called The First Lie Wins by Ashley Elston. And it was a really cool psychological thriller. I didn't know where it was going at first, and then just kind of twisted it around to where it was exciting it was actually fun to actually continue it on. You know, hey, I can't wait to, you know, I'll put it down. I can't wait to, you know, finish the next few chapters and so forth. So highly recommend something like that for the person that reads a lot of nonfiction books, is to kind of get away a little bit and read a fiction book every once in a while, and let your mind go and have some fun with it, versus you know, focusing and concentrating and trying to, you know what everyone does with the nonfiction type books.
What I like about that is you can do both at the same time, right? Like I can be reading a nonfiction and a fiction book at the same time, and it's not like my wires get crossed, right? Like, because there's really not a lot of stories in it. So I'm at any one time I'm reading like 2 books, because I'm always reading a fiction and a nonfiction. So from that standpoint, 13 by Steve Kavanaugh is one you might want to check out, Jody. It's similar. Okay. It's a thriller,
13.
but it's 13. Yeah, I'll send you the link.
Okay.
Yeah, it was really good. It was about a guy that got on a jury, and it's a really interesting story. I don't want to give too much away of it, but it was a fast read for me because I enjoyed it so much. But in terms of the other book I'm reading that I had on first on my list, it's what I really like is when authors tell a story, but then in that story they're also giving like factoids away, kind of like what's the one you have, Jody, Mr. Smooth, isn't that what he does?
Mr. Smooth, yeah.
It's through a story, in each chapter he kind of gives like a little lesson. So the one I'm reading like that right now is called Pound the Stone by Joshua Medcalf. He also wrote the Chop Wood and Carry Water, and it's a similar style where like he writes a chapter about something, and then at the end of each chapter there's like different parables that come from it. So that's the one I'm reading right now, called Pound the Stone by Joshua Medcalf, and really enjoying that. So those are kind of the couple books that's fascinated me over the past month or so. So cool. Well, definitely appreciate you coming on, Mickie. And as always, we want to kind of end with how our listeners can find you, and and also final thoughts. So I'll start with you, Mickie, then we'll end with you, Jody, with your final thoughts.
Sure. So my website's eReleases.com. That free masterclass I alluded to, it's an hour long, great place for anybody to start. And they can sort of envision a PR campaign of 6 to 8 releases and make sure that they're strategic from the beginning. That's at eReleases.com/plan, PLAN. And again, no cost for that.
Awesome. And then what's your final takeaway for our listeners?
Yeah, I got a really good understanding of the difference between PR and just a regular ad, which is, I think, you know, for a lot of people, it's just more education. And I thought telling the story and all that kind of stuff was an ad, but in reality, it's public relations, and you can kind of pick it up for really any subject, with every company. I'm sure there's many, many different things, if you really dig in deep, that you could talk about that would help generate revenue for your company. Awesome.
Well, I thank both of you for. Oh, my final thought. Yeah, no, again, it was very educational for me. And again, my thought of always press releases was very almost could be written by AI. That was always the way I looked at it when I did it for the public companies I worked for. So you kind of put a different spin on it for me, that that those type of press releases get picked up in very few places, where if you can have a pretty good story for a press release that a lot of people are interested in, then it can really help your business. And I never even thought of that as a strategy. So I learned a lot here. Great. Well, appreciate both you guys, and hope our listeners get a lot out of this.